Hello, my name is Katarina Praljak, and I'm the Director of Communications at Professional Engineers Ontario. Thank you for taking the time to join us today to learn more about PEO's new license application process, as well as the work PEO is doing to engage stakeholders who may have been impacted by the licensing changes. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I'd like to begin today's webinar by acknowledging that I'm joining you from traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Just a quick housekeeping item. Our presenters today will be taking questions that were submitted in advance and also ones submitted here today in real time. To ask a question, simply enter your question in the Q&A box, then click send. We've received lots of questions already, which we'll do our best to answer today. Questions that don't get answered in today's webinar will be posted on PEO's website in the coming days, at which time you'll be notified via email and social media on where to access those FAQs. With that, I'd now like to introduce our presenters. With us today are Jennifer Qualietta, CEO and Registrar of PEO, David Smith, Director of External Relations, and Jose Vera, Director of Licensing. Thank you all for being here. During our webinar today, David will speak about our stakeholder engagement process, and then Jose will review our new licensing process in greater detail. Jennifer, would you like to begin by giving our webinar attendees some background on the recent licensing changes?
Thank you, Katarina. Hello, everyone, and welcome to PEO's webinar on how our new licensing process is going to work. I thank you all for joining us today. Let me begin by saying, I, like many of you joining us here today, am also an engineer, and I too have gone through PEO's licensing process. Some of you may be wondering why PEO has amended its licensing process. The short answer is that we are ensuring that our licensing is fair to all applicants, particularly for international engineering graduates. But first, I want to add some context. PEO, along with other regulatory bodies in Ontario, is responsible to the Office of the Fairness Commissioner, which ensures that regulatory bodies are transparent, objective, impartial, and fair for anyone wishing to apply or practice a regulated profession. In 2021 and 2022, the province amended the Fair Access to Regulated Professions and Compulsory Trades Act, or FARPACTA as we call it for short. As of July 1st, the majority of non-healthcare regulatory bodies will be required to make a decision on the vast majority of applicants for licensure from internationally trained applicants within 6 months of receiving a complete application. Additionally, by December 2nd of this year, no regulatory body can require Canadian professional experience as part of its licensing requirements unless they receive an exemption from the Minister of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. When the province introduced the FARPACTA amendments in 2021 and 2022, the intention was to facilitate a fairer licensure process for those whose professional training and experience is from somewhere outside of Canada. In 2016, only a quarter of internationally trained professionals were employed in the regulated professions for which they trained or studied. For many internationally trained applicants, the lengthy application process, which could take years, and the Canadian work experience requirements could prove barriers to becoming licensed and employed in their chosen profession. International applicants applying to PEO face these challenges. PEO is the fourth largest regulator in Ontario. We have the second highest number of internationally trained license holders amongst Ontario regulators. And in a typical year, up to 60% of applicants for PEO licensure are internationally trained. So on May 15th, PEO introduced its new FARPACTA compliant application process. As of May 15th, no less than 90% of applicants for PEO licensure, whether they are from Canada or from abroad, will receive a decision on their application for licensure within 180 days or 6 months. To facilitate this, you must now have completed both your academic and experience requirements at the time you submit your application. Additionally, we have dropped and removed our Canadian engineering experience and replaced it with a competency-based assessment of applicants' engineering experience. We now also recognize many more international engineering undergraduate degrees, which will be accompanied by a technical exam program. We received a lot of great questions from our stakeholders, many of whom are here today. Jose and David will respond to as many questions as possible, and in the event we don't get to all of them today, we will address them in a frequently asked questions page on the PEO website in the days ahead. Once those are up on the website, we will let you know. Again, I want to thank all of you for attending today's webinar. PEO celebrated its 100th anniversary last year, and our new licensing process is one of many changes that PEO has introduced in the past few years as we strive to become a modern and effective 21st century regulator. I hope that we're able to answer all of your questions today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. I'll now turn it over to David Smith, PEO's Director of External Relations.
Thanks, Katarina, and welcome everyone. I'm happy to share information on how stakeholders have been and will continue to be engaged in the evolution of our licensing process. At the end of my remarks, I'll share an email address that anyone can use to contact our external relations team should you have any questions about our engagement activities, or would like to share your expertise on a particular issue, or offer feedback on our work to regulate the practice of engineering and govern our license and certificate holders. I'll start by picking up on a comment Jennifer made at the beginning of her remarks, specifically our efforts to meet the expectations and requirements of government. As we consider changes to our licensing process, our staff maintain regular contact with the Office of the Fairness Commissioner and the Ministries of the Attorney General and Labor to ensure that our new process would meet with both the spirit and intent of the amended FARPACTA legislation. We also did our best to inform our stakeholders of the decisions that were being made. This list includes important groups such as university and colleges, newcomer and settlement agencies, engineering advocacy organizations, engineering interns, engineering students, employers of engineers, and of course, our applicants and license and certificate holders. We know and appreciate that some stakeholder groups have been impacted by these decisions, so addressing the effects of our FARPACTA-driven changes is very much top of mind for our staff and our council. For example, our volunteer engineering intern, or EIT program, was suspended to new applicants as of May 15th. Under the new licensing process, the required engineering work experience must be attained before applying. This meant that the EIT program, which was designed to help applicants as they acquired work experience, was no longer sustainable in its original form. The suspension of the program to new applicants was necessary since the Professional Engineers Act explicitly limits the optional EIT designation to those who have already applied for licensure. This stipulation makes it impractical for the program to exist within the 6-month target for a licensing decision. We realize that prospective applicants, engineering students, employers of engineers, and others have been affected by this decision in different ways. So now we're reaching out to affected groups to get a better idea of the impact of the program suspension to new applicants. As part of this work, we will soon be launching a public survey on the EIT program. This brief survey will help us to determine how prospective applicants can best be supported on their path to licensure, as well as how best to serve the needs of the profession as a whole in the context of serving and protecting the public interest. So please keep an eye on our website, social media channels, and your email inbox for information on how to participate. And we look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, we continue to support current PEng applicants enrolled in the EIT program as long as they continue to meet the related requirements. Another issue we're studying involves programs that previously offered a pathway to licensure as a PEng, but no longer do so under the new system, such as Bachelor of Technology programs. On this issue, we're also speaking with concerned stakeholders and gathering information should Council decide to consider recognizing other programs with or without confirmatory exams as equivalent to those accredited by the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board. Staff are also working with the Ministry of the Attorney General to remove the Canadian experience requirement from the regulation, for which Council approved a motion in March of this year. That motion also included a commitment to explore how we will measure the impact of the decision, including what data needs to be collected and analyzed. This is a multi-year exercise that will involve evaluating the effectiveness of the new competency-based assessment model used to confirm required engineering competencies. And we will be seeking input from our stakeholders on this in due time. As an organization, we're committed to doing everything possible to fulfill our regulatory mandate efficiently and effectively. As part of this commitment, we're dedicated to providing engagement opportunities to build ongoing and meaningful two-way communication with our stakeholders. The feedback on various issues that we collect will be documented to support deliberations by staff, our governance committees, and council. It will also help us identify and address any gaps or potential risks in our operation, and will better inform our policies, practices, and strategic initiatives. Ultimately, these engagement efforts will help to ensure that we continuously deliver and communicate well-considered and credible regulatory outcomes that align with our mandate of protecting the public interest while also maintaining public confidence in our regulatory role. In the coming months, we will be exploring various opportunities to better engage our stakeholders in discussions on key issues. This may include focus groups, surveys, meetings, advisory panels, and other methods. We welcome your suggestions, comments, and concerns on our engagement activities and encourage you to reach out to us at any time on any issue by email at engagement@peo.on.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'll now turn it over to Jose Vera, PEO's Director of Licensing, to review the steps of PEO's new license application process.
Hello, everyone. First, let's have a look at today's agenda. So we're going to talk about the two licensing streams that we have, the one for prospective applicants, which are those that would apply today. And we'll also talk about the pre-May 15th applicants that are in the legacy process. We'll also show you how the PEO website is structured to provide information for both streams. And we'll have a look at the Am I Ready to Apply survey, which is an app that helps determine candidates to see if they're ready to apply for the PEng application. And then we'll have a sneak preview of our new online application process. And at the very end, we'll take questions and answers. So in essence, there are two streams that started back in May 15th. Those applications before the May 15th process are under the legacy rules, but we'll apply some new rules. For example, we will not be evaluating for Canadian experience. And the new FARPACTA compliance process started, as Jennifer had indicated, on May 15th. So any applications received May 15th and after are under this new process. So let's have a look at the PEO website. You could see that the menu is divided in such a way that if you're a new prospective applicant, you click there and you'll get information that applies to the new process. But if you had applied before May 15th, you're a pre-May 15th applicant and you're under the legacy process, you'll receive information that way. So it's very much a self-directed process. Let's have a look at now at the steps on the PEng application under the new process. So again, the website has all the information. So I strongly invite you all to visit the website to get the information. And you could see that step number one, you'll start the Am I Ready to Apply survey. You send in your personal information, and then you complete these 6 steps. Let's have a look at the first step. So in essence, the Am I Ready to Apply survey is an app which will guide candidates to help them determine to see if they have the necessary qualifications to apply for a PEng. So for example, if a candidate does not have 48 months of engineering experience, then they're not ready to apply. Let's have a look at the second step. The next step, in essence, the candidate provides personal information and now creates an online account to proceed with the application. Let's have a look at the third step. So the third step is completed in parallel. And in essence, the candidate can now start submitting their academic requirements, academic information, like where they studied. They can start completing the experience requirement, which, as both Jennifer and David said, is the new competency-based assessment. Then they can submit identification, such as government-issued ID, and proof of good character. Let's have a look at the fourth step. So now this is what the new online PNG application looks like. It's a portal, much like your online banking account or your insurance account. The wonderful thing is that you don't have to complete all these steps serially. You can work on them one at a time. So you can request transcripts from your university for academics. You can start completing the competency-based assessment and then submit evidence of good character. Let's have a look at the next steps. So, for example, if I look at the ID requirement portal page, you can submit a PDF, a PNG, or a JPEG of government-issued ID, such as passport or driver's license, and the page contains a complete list of acceptable identification. Now, let's have a look at academic requirements. So let's say you're a graduate from a Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board program, what we call CEAB. Here you would enter your academic information and then request your institution to send to PO electronic transcripts. Once PO receives this transcript, you can see that this checkbox will be ready that says candidates can mark requirements as completed once the e-transcript is received. Now let's have a look what happens if you're a non-CAB candidate. So non-CAB is what we generally refer to as international applicants. They can determine if their education, their program is from a recognized institution, and if they are, they can proceed with the application, and then they would have to contact the World Education Services, known as WES, for them to send PO an electronic report of the relevant academic information. In essence, it's like sending us a translated transcript. Now let's talk about competency-based assessments. So as both Jennifer and David had indicated, PO Council has approved the use of the Pan-Canadian Competency-Based Assessment method for the assessment of professional engineering work experience, also known as CBA. So in CBA, candidates must demonstrate 34 competencies. These competencies were determined by Engineers Canada in an evidence-based study where leading engineering firms were surveyed on what are the competencies a professional engineer should have, such as the knowledge of engineering standards. And something that's important is that now CBA has become the standard throughout Canada, as many regulators in other provinces are using competency-based assessments. So what are the benefits of competency-based assessment? One is that it's a more objective methodology, and we now have validators instead of referees who validate the competencies. Now, the experience is equivalent to Canadian experience, but not necessarily located in Canada. So for example, if we have a candidate in Nigeria working for Shell Petroleum, they will be using the same American Petroleum Institute standards that we actually use here in Windsor, Ontario. So let's have now a look at good character. So in essence, in good character, candidates will answer 11 questions related to their ethical and legal conduct. This questionnaire can be accessed multiple times within the application portal, and they would only mark completed once they have answered all the questions. Now let's have a look at the next step, which is step 4. So here, step 4, the candidate must accept the declaration and submit both the application and payment. Now, something very important, PO has 10 days to confirm that the application the candidate submitted is complete, meaning it has all the information we discussed, the e-transcripts, the competency-based assessment, the validation, the good character, and the ID. Let's have a look at now at step 5. So remember that Jennifer was saying that once an application is submitted, now PO has 180 days to give the candidate, the applicant, an answer, but also the applicant now has to pass the National Professional Practice exam within these 180 days. And in this process, the PO is actually looking at both the academics, conducting the experience assessment of the CBA, and the good character assessment as well. Now let's look at the next step and the final step, which is step 6, which is a decision. So basically here, PO makes an application decision where there are 2 possible outcomes. 1, a license is granted, or 2, if a license is not granted, then PO has to issue a notice of proposal, which is sent to the applicant. The applicant has a right to a hearing, and a decision is granted at the hearing.
Before we begin the Q&A portion of the webinar, I'd love to give our webinar attendees a special preview of a video that PEO will be launching on July 1st. The video goes over all the steps involved in PEO's new license application process, and we hope you'll find it helpful, and we encourage you to share it with your networks on July 1st.
PEO has introduced changes to its application process for obtaining a professional engineering license. The modernized application process complies with requirements under Ontario's Fair Access to Regulated Professions and Compulsory Trades Act and ensures most successful applicants receive their PEng within 6 months of submitting a complete license application to PEO. Here's a look at the 5 steps for completing the application process. Step 1. Complete the Am I Ready to Apply self-assessment on PEO's website. The Am I Ready to Apply self-assessment will determine if you're eligible to apply by asking questions such as, do you have a bachelor's degree in an engineering program that is at least 4 years in length? And do you hold at least 48 months of professional engineering experience? Step 2. Create an account in the PEO portal. This is where candidates can access the online PEng application. Once you have registered for an account, you may log in and navigate to the Applications tab in the menu bar to start the application. Step 3. Complete the application requirements. This step forms the bulk of the application process. There are 4 things you'll need to do before submitting your application. Provide proof of identification. Provide your academic information. Select Add Program and add the required information. If your institution or program is not listed, you can manually enter the information and request program verification from PEO. Candidates with an engineering degree obtained outside of Canada, but that is included on PEO's academic equivalency list, will need to register, pay for, and pass 4 technical exams of their choosing. Technical exams are all online and can be completed anywhere in the world. Enter your engineering work experience information. You must also complete a competency-based assessment or CBA. The CBA examines engineering competencies across several categories, including technical, communication, project management, and professional accountability. And complete a good character questionnaire. Here, we ask questions such as if you are licensed by any engineering regulator or licensing body, and if you have ever been found guilty of professional misconduct or violated laws. Once you've completed all these requirements, you're ready to proceed with your application. Step 4. Submit payment for the application fee. Within 10 days of submitting payment and your application, PEO will notify you to let you know if your application has been deemed complete. This is the point at which the 6-month assessment period begins. Which brings us to the 5th and final step. Candidates whose completed applications are accepted by PEO must register for and complete the online National Professional Practice Exam, or NPPE. The NPPE is a 2.5-hour closed-book online exam on ethics, professional practice, engineering law, and professional liability. Upon successful completion of the NPPE, and once PEO has deemed that an applicant has satisfied all the requirements for licensing, approval for the PEng license will be granted. PEO's new application process makes applying for an engineering license more efficient, transparent, and fair for all applicants. For more information on the PEng license application process, visit peo.on.ca.
Thank you for watching. Once again, this video will be available on PEO's social media channels as of July 1st, and we encourage you to share it with your networks. A recording of today's presentations and Q&As will also be available on PEO's website in the coming days. Let's now begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. As mentioned, we've received lots of questions from both current and prospective applicants, and I'm seeing lots of really great questions being submitted in the Q&A box. Over the next 30 minutes, Jose and David will do their best to answer as many questions as possible. We'll begin with some commonly asked questions about the requirements under PEO's new license application process, starting with education requirements. Jose, one of the more common questions PEO has received from prospective applicants is whether a master's degree or PhD in engineering obtained in Canada will be considered the same as an undergraduate engineering degree. What can you tell us about this?
Thank you, Katerina. That's a great question. So about a master's degree being considered the same as an undergraduate degree, the answer is no, because the regulation says the academic requirement to apply for PEng license is a bachelor's degree in an engineering program that's accredited by the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board. As you saw in the presentation, that's CEAB, or a bachelor's degree that meets PEO's acceptance criteria plus successful completion of the 4 technical exams.
Thank you, Jose. So what do you recommend to candidates whose degree isn't listed on PEO's academic equivalency list?
So if a candidate has a bachelor's of engineering degree, they could request a further verification of their academic qualifications through the PEO application portal as of July 1st or earlier. They can also choose to apply for a limited license through PEO if they believe they have the necessary qualifications.
Okay, then, so for candidates who don't have a bachelor's degree in engineering, should they consider applying for a limited license?
That is correct.
Great. A question from one of our attendees here today is in regards to their bachelor's and master's degrees. They ask, I have a chemical engineering Bachelor of Science and civil engineering master's. Would it be possible to apply for the civil engineering exam?
So if you could repeat, the bachelor's is a chemical science degree?
Chemical engineering.
Oh, chemical engineering. So yes, so what they would do when they apply, and right now it would be through the new online portal, the state-of-the-art application, they can then see if their chemical bachelor's of engineering degree is in a recognized institution. And if it is, they can proceed and go ahead. If it's not, they can do what's called a verification request.
Great, thanks, Jose. Let's spend a couple minutes discussing technical exams. As you mentioned in your presentation, and as we heard in the video, candidates with an engineering degree obtained outside of Canada, but that is included on PEO's academic equivalency list, will need to pass 4 technical exams of their choosing. A prospective applicant would like to know why international applicants are required to complete technical exams while applicants with a CEAB degree are not. And secondly, why does PEO not recognize designations from other countries?
So basically, as you know, we've always had in the regulation this part of non-CAB degrees and then having a process to look at the equivalency. So we've already had a technical exam program for non-CAB going back several years. So we're not going to change that at this point.
Thanks, Jose. Can you tell us how many exam sittings are offered in a year? And may candidates choose exams from different disciplines?
Yes, that's an excellent question, Katerina. So there are 2 exam sittings per year, and they're not discipline specific. So going back to some of the examples I think that you brought earlier, where someone has a master's in chemical and maybe a degree in civil, or maybe they even worked as a mechanical engineer in another country. They can mix and match the exams from the different disciplines.
And is PEO looking into reducing the number of exams or replacing them with something else?
So PEO will be actually analyzing the data of how many candidates are actually writing the exams and how long does it take them to successfully complete them. Based on that information, PEO may look at this issue further and do additional policy work on it.
Great, thank you, Jose. Let's now get to some of the questions we received about engineering experience requirements. Starting with, do I need to obtain engineering work experience before I can apply?
Yes, so right now with the new system, everything is front-loaded, meaning that the candidate has to provide all the qualifications up front, whether they're academic, whether they're good character or work experience. So they actually have to have the 48 months upfront before they apply. The good news is that, as you know, as of May 15th, we're no longer evaluating for Canadian experience. And in fact, for people in the applicants in the current process, we are no longer evaluating for Canadian experience either.
We received some questions about pre-graduation experience. One of the questions asks if you could explain how the new application process will affect pre-graduation experience records.
So that hasn't changed. In essence, our regulation always required 48 months of work experience, and 1 year could be obtained before graduation, as long as it was done after the halfway point of the degree.
And Jose, as a follow-up to that question, how should candidates document their pre-graduation experience after May 15th?
So now that we are moving to competency-based assessment, they could, although they don't have, a candidate may not have completed the 48 months, they can still create an account on the online portal and start filling in their competencies under the new competency-based assessment system. And that's how they would document it.
Jose, one of our webinar attendees here today would like to know, is industry experience necessary for obtaining an engineering license? This person has been working at a university as a senior research engineer and was wondering if this experience is enough for PEO licensing.
So that's an excellent question. And what I want to explain is that competency-based assessment is fundamentally very different from the previous assessment methods, right? Because now we're focused on competencies. Where the candidate obtained the competencies, it's really up to them. There are many candidates who work for a university and are doing forensic engineering research, and they may qualify. So we don't answer case by case, but certainly there are even other candidates that work for an insurance company, not necessarily industry, doing, again, biomedical engineering work, and they may also qualify. So it's actually not so much the industry work, but actually the focus is on competencies.
Thanks, Jose. Under the pre-May 15th license application process, a postgraduate degree counted towards 1 year of experience. Will this continue to be the case under the new license application process?
So the postgraduate policy is from the pre-May 15th legacy process, and certainly those that are in that process may use the same rules because they benefit them. However, for new candidates, that postgraduate policy is no longer in place. However, again, if their postgraduate experience has the necessary competencies that we see in competency-based assessment, they're more than welcome to use that experience under the new CBA assessment methodology.
Great, thank you. So we'll delve more into CBA-related questions in a moment. But while we're still discussing experience requirements, can you share with our prospective applicants how a candidate may demonstrate Canadian environment competencies if they don't have Canadian experience?
So that's an excellent question. And I spoke a bit to that in the presentation, that in fact, although someone might not be in Canada, they could be using standards that are used in Canada. For example, they could be ISO 9000 standards that are used, say, in Asia or Africa or Europe. Or maybe the example I gave is there could be a candidate who worked for Shell Oil in Nigeria using American Petroleum Institute standards. So these API standards are used, they could be used in Norway, they could be used in Indonesia, they could be used right here in Windsor, Ontario. So that would be equivalent to Canadian experience.
Thanks, Jose. We're receiving lots of questions about experience, but we're going to move on now to talk a little bit about CBA, and maybe we'll come back to some of those questions in a few minutes. The CBA examines engineering competencies across several categories, including technical, communication, project management, and professional accountability. We received several questions about validators, but first, a candidate would like to know if they can start filling in the CBA form while they're acquiring work experience.
So that is a great question. So even if a candidate does not have the 48 months experience yet, they're welcome to open an account on our online portal, which will be available July 1st or earlier. And then they can start entering their experience already and filling out the CBA. But yes, a key point is they can create the account, but they can't submit the application until they've actually had the 48 months of experience.
Great, thank you. And can you tell us that the CBA will be available in other languages down the road?
That is a great question. So other languages and competency-based assessment, we'll have to look into the demand, because certainly, Canada has 2 official languages, and we would certainly look at the possibility of French language if there's enough demand. So we'll look into it, and our policy unit will consider it.
Thanks, Jose. With regards to validators now, some prospective applicants would like to know if they need validators from each work experience, and for experience obtained outside of Canada, who may act as a validator?
So that's a great question. You don't actually, a candidate doesn't need a validator for each work experience, but they need to have a validator for each competency. In many cases, candidates will find that one validator might be able to evaluate their 34 competencies, or maybe they might require 2 or 4 validators. And as far as the work, like who can be a validator, because of our Professional Engineers Act, if the experience is gained in Canada, a validator must be a professional engineer licensed in Canada. Outside of Canada, our preference is that that validator be licensed in the jurisdiction where the work took place, and PO reserves the right to validate the validator.
Jose, in the competency-based assessment applicant's guide, it states that the validator of the applicant's previous experience is not usually a family member. What is your advice to candidates whose experience includes working in a family-owned company where their direct manager, who is also an engineer, was a family member?
That is a great question, and one that we received quite often here at PO in the recent weeks. And we are, just to let everybody know, we are actually updating the guideline shortly, because the original intent of that sentence was to simply say, hey, like my aunt's a PN, could I use my aunt? Well, you can't use our aunt by virtue of the fact that they're a family member. We use the aunt because maybe we worked with them or they were our supervisor, and we recognize at PO that there are many family-owned businesses. So there's really no restriction about the family. It's just a requirement of disclosure from the point of view of the validator. So someone working with family, that family member can be a validator.
Great, thank you. Now, is there an expectation that the applicant and validator will review the ratings together before submission to PEO?
So actually, the expectation is that they would work separately to be more transparent, and that the validator looks at this independently, the validation, than the candidate.
In the event that a candidate's supervisor or supervisors do not want to be their validator, what should the candidate do?
So I have some great news, because I think in the previous process, there was an expectation that the validator had to be a supervisor, but under CBA, a validator does not have to be a direct supervisor. And in fact, does not even have to be in the same company. It could be in another partner company or another contractor firm where that validator is familiar with the competencies of that candidate.
Great, thanks, Jose. So just a couple more questions about the application process before we move into questions from current applicants. In the event that a candidate does not meet one or more of the requirements, is there an appeal process?
Yes. So if we're looking at, like, remember we talked about the academics, the experience, the good character, and writing the National Professional Practice exam. If someone were not to meet one of these requirements, what happens is at the end of the 180 days, a decision is issued. And either the applicant gets issued a license or they're issued what's called a notice of proposal. So if someone did not pass the National Professional Practice exam, they would get the notice of proposal and they have an option to a registration hearing. But I also want to make it clear that applicant also has the right to apply again and pass the National Professional Practice exam.
Thanks, Jose. Let's take a question from one of our webinar attendees. And the question states, I'm an applicant for the engineer in training mechanical engineer and submitted my documents too. My question is, do I need to be physically present in Canada to get the license or EIT designation I'm applying from outside of Canada?
So the good news is because PO has in fact eliminated the Canadian experience requirement, is that there's no requirement that the experience take place here in Canada, and they can actually apply from other jurisdictions and other countries.
Thanks, Jose. Another question from one of our attendees is the financial credit program still available?
So that's a great question. So because in connection to the EIT program that as David very eloquently stated, is no longer sustainable, the financial credit program also falls under that category and is currently paused.
Thanks, Jose. An attendee would like to know if they completed the Am I Ready to Apply survey and the result was that they may not be ready to apply, can they still proceed with the application?
So that's a great question. So something to keep in mind that the Am I Ready to Apply survey, it's a guide. So it is possible that although the Am I Ready to Apply survey indicates that the candidate might not be ready, they can still choose to apply if they believe they have the necessary qualifications.
Thanks, Jose. So just one last question before we move into questions from current applicants. How are you planning to assess the applicants who already have the professional engineer designation from other internationally recognized professional bodies?
So currently, PO doesn't recognize the license of another body unless the applicant's applying for temporary license. But having said that, what we find is that most applicants that are already licensed in another jurisdiction probably already have the qualifications and they actually do well in our process.
Okay, so we received several questions from current applicants, both from those who have the EIT designation and those who do not. One of the most frequently asked questions has been, I'm a current applicant and I applied before May 15th. What happens to my application now?
Great, that's an excellent question. So we got to go back to what David was talking about regarding the Fairness Commissioner. So we are in essence following the advice of the Fairness Commissioner. And for pre-May 15 applicants, what we call the legacy process, the rule is if there's a legacy policy or rule that benefits them, that rule remains. So if there were an engineering intern before, they stay in that process, they benefit. But if there's a new rule that benefits them, so old rules that benefit them stay, but the same applies with new rules that benefit the pre-May 15 applicant. So the implementation of Canadian experience, if that benefits them, then that rule applies to them. So over the next few weeks or even months, PO will be contacting several different groups of applicants to inform them and invite them into new process rules.
Thanks for clarifying that, Jose. And a follow-up question to that is, can I transfer my existing pre-May 15th application to the new process for faster processing?
So that's a great question. Could somebody, in essence, cancel their or withdraw their application and reapply again. Our process allows that. My only advice would be that if someone is almost finished and all they needed was their work experience, now that we eliminated Canadian experience and we have competency-based assessment that's more objective, more structured, they're probably just better off finishing that stage. If someone is in an earlier stage, they may or may not benefit from the new process. It's a judgment call that they have to make. They're all welcome to do so, but they also have to keep in mind that we will, if they're a current applicant, we will apply new rules that benefit them, so they may still be processed relatively quickly.
It's very helpful information. Thanks, Jose. What do you recommend to current applicants who applied prior to May 15th and whose only remaining requirement is to demonstrate 1 year of Canadian experience? Will they still be required to demonstrate 1 year of Canadian experience since their application was received prior to May 15th, or should they reapply under the new application process?
So the good news here is that we're no longer evaluating for Canadian experience, even for the legacy process applicants that applied before May 15th. So that is being removed, and that's actually a group that we'll be focusing on early because the Fairness Commissioner asked us to. So we'll be contacting, for example, provisional license holders that had everything except the 1 year Canadian experience to now transfer them into the new rules.
So within 10 days of submitting payment and an application, PEO will notify candidates to let them know if their application has been deemed complete. This is the point at which the 6-month assessment period begins. Do the 6 months take into account the time it takes to write the 4 technical exams?
That is a great question. So right now, with the new July 1 process, the technical exams have to be written and passed before the 6-month process kicks in. So to have a complete application, that would include the 4 technical exams, and that's done before the 6 months.
Wonderful. And as a follow-up to that question, since there are only 2 sittings per year, if an applicant submits their application by June of this year, would they be able to write the fall/winter 2023 technical exams?
So the best thing to answer that question is that our website has all the sittings and the actual deadlines to do so. But if they register early, they can actually write all the exams in 1 sitting.
Thank you, Jose. Current applicants have until June 30th to submit their professional experience record forms using the pre-CBA formats and system. Based on the new CBA process, the postgraduate degree credit will not be applied to degrees like the MEng anymore. So if we submit our forms before June 30th, will we also get the postgraduate degree credit for MEng degrees under the pre-CBA format as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if someone applies before June 30th under the 5 quality criteria, the rules of that apply, including pre-grad credits. The only thing that doesn't apply is we won't be looking for the 1 year Canadian experience.
Great, Jose. Let's take one more question from current applicants before moving into some questions about the EIT designation. And it is, do you accept ICAS assessment equivalence?
So that is a great question. So yes, so everybody knows ICAS is like an education verification service that evaluates international degrees. PEO has made the decision to use World Education Services to look at the transcripts of international applicants and create a report for PEO to validate them. So we currently are not accepting ICAS. We're accepting the WES application process, the WES verification system, and more information is available on our website.
Jose, thanks very much for sharing very valuable information for attendees here today. I may come back to you in a few minutes with some questions, but I think we'll switch gears for a few minutes now to answer a few questions about the EIT designation and PEO's efforts to engage stakeholders who've been impacted by the recent changes. David, one of the most common questions PEO has received since announcing that the EIT program will end on May 15th is whether PEO will provide an alternative to the engineering intern program. What can you tell us about that?
Thanks, Katarina. I can tell you this is certainly something that we're looking into at the moment. So In the coming weeks and months, we'll be engaging with our affected stakeholders to determine the value of the program to each of these groups and to investigate other possible options for prospective applicants looking to gain the required engineering experience.
Thanks, David. That's very helpful. What if an application for the EIT designation was made prior to May 15th? Will it still be considered by PO?
Yes, the short answer is yes. I think Jose may have alluded to that in one of his answers, but if an application for licensure was received prior to May 15th and the request was made to enroll into the EIT program, then that request will certainly be considered. And actually, if you applied before May 15th, but did not enroll the EIT program and have changed your mind and you're interested in doing so now, you're still able to do so. And of course, conversely, if you applied on or after May 15th, you're not eligible to apply for the EIT program.
Thanks, David. You just answered my next question, so I'll move on to my subsequent question. For local chapter leaders present in today's webinar, can you provide some information on the status of the License Assistance Program, or LAP, after June 30th? Would they be guiding the EITs on the new CBA-based approach to submit their experience record, or would it continue as per the previous approach?
Sure, thanks, Katerina. Yeah, the licensure assistance program remains available to existing EITs. So as Jose mentioned, the benefits of the program haven't changed to those who are actively enrolled as EITs. So after June 30th, participating EITs will need to be guided using the new CBA model. And our website has a great resource to help with this. I believe it's called the Applicant's Guide to Competency-Based Assessment. And that guide provides a very comprehensive overview of the roles and responsibility of the applicants, of the validators, and the assessors. And it also helps applicants navigate the CBA system by detailing the 34 engineering competencies and how they should be met and how they should be presented. It includes a list of indicators which act as a guideline for selecting experience examples that best demonstrate the applicant's exposure to the competencies. And it explains the competency rating system and the rating rubric, which measures the level of competence of the applicant per category and determines an applicant's level of readiness for licensure. So I would encourage everyone, regardless of whether they're involved in the LAP program or not, to seek this information out on our website because it's a very valuable resource.
Thanks, David. It's very helpful. And what title can employers now use since the EIT program is no longer continuing for new graduates who are working towards their PEng? Can the acronym EIT still be used?
Yeah, for EITs who were registered in the program before May 15th, they may continue to use the EIT designation, as long as they continue their current licensing process and meet any deadlines and requirements assigned to their current PEng application. Applicants who are not enrolled in the EIT program may not use the designation. In terms of specific guidance on what employers can use, we don't recommend or offer a specific term for these type of applicants, but employers may consider using the terms engineering graduates or engineering associates for those who are still working towards their PEng license. And as far as applicants go, they can simply reference their degree after their name.
Thanks, David. We have a few more minutes left in the webinar, so I'm just having a look here at the chat or the Q&A box, and we have lots of questions still coming in. So I'm going to use this time to see if we can answer a few more of our attendees' questions. This question asks, does the validator have to be a PEng?
That's a great question, Katerina. So if the experience is gained in Canada, our act and regulations require that validator be a professional engineer. If the work experience is gained abroad, it is PO's preference that validator be licensed in their jurisdiction, and PO reserves the right to validate the validator.
Thanks, Jose. Here's another question. Since there are over 30 competencies, is there a limit to how many competencies can be validated by a single validator?
That is a great question. So there's actually no limit. In other words, a candidate could have one validator who evaluates all 34. And to go to a very extreme case, although we'll never see this happen, you could literally have one validator per competency. So you could have 34 validators, but we all know that's not going to happen. It's always going to be around maybe one validator up to say 4 validators.
Jose, a question from a current applicant. They're asking, could you please clarify the June 30th deadline to submit the experience records through the 5 quality criteria formats?
Yes, so we got to go back to a council motion back in November that already accepted competency-based assessment, the pan-Canadian model, as a de facto replacing the Canadian experience, and that we implemented as of May 15th. So as of May 15th, anyone can, who's having the work experience evaluated, they could submit a competency-based assessment. However, we know that a transition period often is difficult for applicants. And we had some applicants that were in the middle of completing their 5 quality criteria. So we gave them up to June 30th to complete their application, their experience evaluation with the old 5 quality criteria. But as of July 1, which is the date where FERPACTA comes into effect, we must all have competency-based assessment at that point.
Great, thank you. One of our attendees says, I have an ongoing license application with another province regulatory body, completed educational assessment and about to submit the competency-based assessment. Would PEO consider to continue with whatever stage I was in?
Yeah, that's a tricky question to answer because case by case, we don't really know. Like, but something we could say is that if an applicant in another jurisdiction, Canadian jurisdiction, is close to completing their application and they're going to obtain their PN shortly, then they could always apply using the transfer or what we call the mobility agreement to PEO. It might be more effective for them to do it that way. But we do not, although many provinces have adopted competency-based assessment, we're not necessarily going to give credits for someone who did it in Alberta because there are actually important, significant differences between their competency-based assessment and ours.
Thanks, Jose. I think we have time for one last question. And the question is, I was an applicant and my case was closed because I didn't have the Canadian experience. Is it possible to reopen my application or do I have to open a new application?
So the details here matter because it depends what we mean by closed. If they had a notice of proposal and they had everything except the Canadian experience, they're certainly more than welcome to reapply. The good news here is that any applicant who reapplies, if they had already their academics evaluated and they were actually accepted by PEO or they had passed the National Professional Practice exam, all that is taken into consideration. So they actually get credits for all that. And with this particular candidate, if they had everything except the 1-year Canadian experience, well, I would say they're a strong candidate to actually get their license, but I can't comment on their 48 months because we don't know what that exactly was. Great question.
David and Jose, thank you both very much for all your insights today. Before we close out the webinar, is there anything you'd like to leave our attendees with? David?
Oh, sure. I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today. It was great sharing all this information, and maybe I could remind everyone to watch out for our survey on the EIT program that will be available in the coming weeks, and encourage you all to send your comments and suggestions on our work and engagement activities. And feel free to use our engagement@peo.on.ca email address to do so. Thanks.
Thanks very much, David. And Jose, any closing comments that you'd like to share with our attendees?
Yes, I want to thank everyone who joined. It shows great engagement on your behalf and interest in participation. And I thank everyone for your questions. All transitions always have their challenges. As Jennifer indicated, though, it's important to never lose the fact that we're doing this for fairness, right? So although some may look at competency-based assessment, say, okay, this is new, but it's a more objective, a more structured way of evaluating everyone's competencies, and therefore it's a much more fair way to do so. Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you both. And thank you all for joining us today. For all the latest information about PEO's new license application process, please visit peo.on.ca. Wishing you all a good afternoon.